Hello, and welcome to episode 6 of Writers, Readers, and the Stories We Love. It's so much fun that this little video series that Diane Sanchez and I started kind of on a pandemic whim is now 7 months running. We've had some great guests, and it's just been a lot of fun to be able to hang out with different writers and talk about writing and books and stories and all the things that we enjoy so much. I am very happy to have with me today Jefferson Navicky, who is the author of 3 books, including Antique Densities, which is forthcoming next year. His work has appeared in a variety of journals, and he is also the archivist for the Maine Women's Writers Collection and teaches English at Southern Maine Community College. You can find his full bio and website in the description for this video. But I've known Jefferson for a while, and he just works multi-genre and is a delightful writer. And so I'm very excited to be able to hear from his work a little bit, and then we're just going to be chatting about a variety of topics. So for anyone tuning in live, please feel free to drop in comments or questions in the chat. I will be keeping an eye on that. There's a slight delay, but I will try to get to as many of those as we can today. But to start us off, I asked Jefferson if he was willing to read a few things for us before we start talking. So we'll get right to it. Jefferson, thank you for being here today, and take it away.
Great, thanks, Josh. Thanks for inviting me. This is a fun thing to do. So I'm going to read, as Josh mentioned, from this forthcoming book. It's called Antique Densities. The full title is Antique Densities, Modern Parables and Other Experiments in Short Prose. And Antique Densities as a title is this reference to Shirley Hazard novel that I really love. It's a reference to books. And the whole book is really basically a kind of nod and acknowledgement to this one particular moment in time where I was 22 years old and I was visiting my brother in New York City, where he had a internship at an art gallery, and it was the place where you don't get paid anything, but you get a very fancy lunch, and he had invited me to lunch, and so I had gone to this really fancy, fun lunch, and I was walking down West Broadway in Soho, and I just ducked into this bookstore, and I just picked up a book on a whim called Tales of Wisdom, 100 Modern Parables. It's an anthology edited by Howard Schwartz, and it just totally blew my mind. I didn't know that books or like pieces of writing could exist like this, and parables, are kind of loosely enigmatic pieces of fiction that they don't really come out with a moral, but they're pointing in some kind of direction like that, and I just never knew things like that could exist. And so the whole book is basically kind of a testament to how important that book is and how much I loved it. And one of the pieces in there was from Jorge Luis Borges, the Argentine writer. And the first piece I'm going to read is about him and kind of my interactions with him, or at least how I'd imagine that. So it's called Me and Borges. This morning, I'm thinking of Borges. Last night, we saw Holy Motors. The whole movie, all 2 hours of it, was better executed by Borges and his page-long prose piece, Everything and Nothing, about Shakespeare's genius, but ultimately his emptiness in living solely through his characters. Borges' piece is genius in compression, half essay, half fiction. His entire oeuvre built on short forms, or at least the ones I most love. He never wrote a novel or any long pieces, substantial short stories, but the ones I admire, Everything and Nothing, and Borges and I, are even shorter than that. And essays and book reviews and poems. He was a classics man, which I am not, but he was also a minimalist, an elegant compressionist who belongs in the city center, walking in the cool spring sun on an abandoned boulevard on a Sunday morning. He's walking up a tree-lined sidewalk headed for the library, the place where all good things come from and eventually come to rest. Its cool shade permeates a delicious stale air. I am walking with him. Together, we talk a little. We walk by shut shops, their metal grates pulled down, all of them, to create a long run of sheet metal skin. Someone sweeps the sidewalk. A corner store is putting out its day's selection of flowers, more today than usual as it's Sunday, and soon many will walk by in a generous mood returning from church. Borges and I say so little to each other. He's an old man, shuffling steadily. I keep his pace, watching for places he might stumble. I take his elbow through crosswalks. White flaps of trash flutter before us. I used to want Borges to talk to me more, to tell me important things, some bits of that huge pool of knowledge he's acquired. But his intelligence isn't like that. He doesn't speak of it. I used to even want to provoke Borges, offend him with talk of sex and swearing. I knew he didn't approve, but I finally gave up on that for these moments, these walks on clear Sundays where we don't speak. If the day's fine enough, Borges will sit on a bench outside the cafe in the sun, and I will run inside to buy us cappuccinos and the croissants we both love so much. The flaky butter and caffeine feeding our souls more than anything, more than this beautiful air. We continue on, the library, our destination now in sight. We cross the courtyard at a diagonal, scattering pigeons from their strutting. Borges pauses to watch them flutter up in the air like pots of clay. We climb the wide cement steps to the high doors. I open one for Borges, who nods and enters the library. The air is so much like I remember it. Borges moves to his pedestal, equipped with a reading lamp, a chair, and the selection of books he's asked for. Soon the people will file through to smile and quietly gawk at him. He won't acknowledge them, only continue his reading. What will I do today? Where will I go now that I've found myself in the library? Well, I will go out for a while, then return for a few hours, go out to meet some people, and then I'll return again and again. Wherever I go, I always come back. I'm so happy to come back. And then I think I'm actually just going to read one more piece. So that's towards the beginning of the book, and then this is the piece that ends the book. And a lot of these pieces are sort of old, and I think they were written quite maybe 10 years ago or so, and I've been working on them and kind of interchanging them in the manuscript. But this one stays pretty much intact from the way that I wrote it. It's called Archive. You stand on a platform waiting for the train. It is due to arrive very soon. You stand with many other people returning from a holiday weekend in the country. It is late in the afternoon and many people eat sandwiches. Many people read newspapers, pausing to peer down the tracks into the vanishing point. You ask next to you what time it is. He tells you. Then he asks you why you were in the country this weekend. You say, to see the leaves turn and to escape the city. You might hear my dog barking up there. He says he produces operas. He has a thick German accent. He asks what you do. You say you are a writer. I thought so, he says. And what do you write about? As you are about to stumble through an answer, someone yells, the train is coming. The train is coming. You look down the track, expecting to see the train, but you see nothing. Everyone standing on the platform begins to move hurriedly to the edge, invisibly pushing each other together. Still, you see no approaching train. The overwhelming commotion of passengers drowns out all other sound. Another person yells, the train is coming, the train is coming. The man with the German accent smiles at you, lifting his bags to board the train. Everyone else moves in a blur, only he is stationary, caught in a momentary snag of time. I am writing about this, you shout to the man with the German accent, but the throng of people has separated you from him. The passengers begin to forcibly push you forward. You step off the edge of the platform with all the other waiting passengers. You do not know if the train is in front of you, but you feel relief in knowing you are writing. However, this relief mixes with a delicious yet irreducible sadness of realizing that your life has also been nothing more than an exercise in archivement.
Thank you. I'm just sitting with that for it's always so much fun to hear your work. And these two pieces uh, pair, I think, really well together. And I love just the imagery and the ideas in both of those.
Thanks.
Yeah, it's funny. I haven't read a ton of Borges, but his story, The Aleph, is I think the first thing I read from him.
Yeah.
And that's one of those stories that just like found a place inside, and I've just kind of carried it ever since reading that one.
That's an amazing story. And and mentioning Borges again makes me think that there's a new book. Jay Perini wrote a memoir, and I think it's the opposite of my thing is called Me and Borges. His book is Borges and Me, and it's this trip that he went to grad school in Scotland, studied with a guy who was a translator for Borges, and Borges visited him in Scotland, and for some strange reason they had this weekend together, just Jay Perini and Borges, who was like in his late 70s, and it sounds really, really good. So it's a kind of thing that I want to hunt down and read, just to, because my piece is like Borges in my imagination, and that's kind of like everybody's imagination of Borges, like some kind of library guy who's nice and quiet, and but I don't think he's actually was like that.
Yeah, no, that sounds fascinating. I'll have to keep an eye out for it, see if I can track down a copy somewhere. Um, and just on a side note, Claire is chiming in the comments. She also loves listening to you read. So it's gentle and cozy, like a human
Hello, Claire.
fireplace.
That's nice. That's nice to hear her voice. At least I can hear her voice in my head.
Yes. Okay, so let's dive into the discussion. So I think just to start us off, I'm always kind of curious. Like we all, I think, find our way into writing for different reasons. But there's a lot of kind of similar motivations, I think, once we get there. So can you just talk a little bit about like your beginnings and your development as a writer? Like, was it education? Was it just working at it on your own? And then how did you find your way specifically into like the sort of writing that you do now?
Yeah, that is a good question. I mean, Josh had sent me these questions before, and I've been turning over that one like for a while. Like, how do you answer a question like that? I mean, I think that, so I grew up in southeastern Ohio, and I mainly played a lot of basketball as a young person, and I played in college for a couple of years, and that was like a very formative experience. And even though in some aspect it wasn't like being a writer, on many other aspects it's really was like it taught me a lot of the things that I kind of use in my writing life. I can trace back to basketball. Like there's a certain kind of I don't know. It also, I start speaking in basketball coachisms, but there's just kind of like hard work, dedication kind of thing that I don't really think of writing as all that romantic. Like I kind of think about it, I try to like think about it, doing it every day and kind of letting that stuff accrue. And like the more you put kind of a steady commitment in, the better the things get. And I didn't really start writing until maybe I started writing a few poems when I was in college, and they were really, really bad poems. And I did have a very good writing group, and I went to Denison University in Ohio, outside of Columbus, and that writing group saved my life. There's John Miller, who was my professor. I would bring in these poems that I remember, particularly one. There was a poem that I was like a metaphorical poem about climbing a staircase, and how life was like climbing a staircase, and it was terrible. It was really a bad poem. And there were other students in that workshop, or that writing group they would kind of roll their eyes when I would bring things in. It was so embarrassing to me because I knew it was bad, but I was like, I really want to figure out how to make it good. And like, how can I learn how to do this? So he would sit down with me, and there would be like it was like just a conference table. And sometimes it was the group would meet every Thursday night, and sometimes it would be just me and him. I would bring in a poem, and we would spend an hour, and he would just talk about what you could do with this and that, and how you might want to change things. It was the most valuable writing experience that I had ever had.
I like that. I never thought about the mindset crossing over between like sports and writing, but like now that you're putting it into words, I can see totally how that works. Like that same dedication to craft, just with a very different output.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I think the part that I didn't add that was that at some point I got really fed up with basketball, and I really wanted to start putting more time into writing. So I just kind of had to like make a clean break and read more. You know.
Yeah, it's
I
remarkable
also
to.
kind of go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was just saying it's remarkable the impact that a good teacher can have on that development. When if you find someone who can encourage that, because I know like for me, I was always kind of like creative in storytelling, but writing as a practice was never on my radar until I think it was like junior high, high school. We had a half semester creative writing elective with a teacher who just encouraged that. And like, I still remember that was the moment it clicked and I was like, this is something like I could do. And then
And
from there, it was,
was it a kind of a matter of encouragement from that person, or it was something in your head you just realized like, oh, there's a like you could translate from the stories that you were telling and you could write them.
it was both. Like, it was like sitting down and writing stories, which is something I had never done. And so being asked to do it for this class, like, got me to sit down and put pen to paper. And
Hmm.
then seeing the reception from like classmates and from a teacher who saw something in there that had potential
Hmm.
was enough for me to then go on in college and then grad school to
Hmm.
like actually pursue this.
Yeah. Oh gosh, that you when you were talking about like the reaction from classmates and teachers, that all of a sudden that this memory came back to me of that's college stuff, and but all of a sudden I remembered second grade, and we were in small groups and we had to write a story, um, and I remember, I think, gosh, I almost remember the three people who were in the group, and they were kind of like messing around and talking, and I wanted to write the story, and I kind of came up with this crazy story about a bunny running across a railroad track. And as I was writing it, the three people in the group were laughing, and they were just laughing and at what I was saying, which is not something that was an experience I had very often, that I would say something and when people would laugh, and I really liked that. And so I was writing it down, and I tried to, was felt very confident about this thing. And then we got back to the larger class, which was like 20 some people, and the teacher asked us to read, and I read back this thing that I thought was going to be like such a crowd pleaser, make everybody laugh, and then was like crickets. Nobody did anything. And I looked over at the three people who had laughed so hard, and they were like, it was just like a moment of like, I think there's some real wisdom now looking back at it, but at the moment I was just like, oh my gosh, what have I done wrong?
Yeah. And I know even like other writers talking about things online and stuff, there's so many formative moments, even like that, where people were told either that they couldn't write and they should stop, or they remember like that one person who told them, like, you have what it takes.
Mm.
And like those are the things that gave them the drive to carry on and make something of this goal that they had.
And was because as we all know, it only takes like one person to really encourage you, because plenty of other people or situations will discourage you.
Yeah. And writing does take that bit of commitment in the face of adversity
Oh
because it's
gosh, yeah.
not always the easiest path, but we do have our fun. Um, okay, so you kind of you've talked about this some already in that first question, but are there other moments like after that workshop that really kind of helped chart your course as a writer, either experience or like other classes or things that came along? Just kind of like benchmarks in that development.
Yeah, well, right. So that was college. And then, well, finding that book when I was visiting my brother in New York was a huge experience that I didn't even realize it was as significant as it was in the moment. But it's kind of like come back time after time. Um, I did, and I also did, then I got an MFA from Naropa University in Colorado, and there were quite a few formative experiences in that, but there was a particular one where I was in a workshop with Banu Kapil, who's a really excellent kind of cross-genre writer, and it was a poetry workshop, and she wanted me to write a different poem, and in the ways that, and I mean, this is kind of an interesting thing to talk about, but like I wasn't aware that I was like writing the same poem every time, even though it was different words, but it was kind of like the same thing all the time. And she really wanted me to break out of that. And so she gave me the prompt to write a poem as if I was Lorca's lover and how that would happen. And that kind of just scrambled my mind. I was like, what? Lorca's lover? How would I ever write a poem like? But once I did it, I wrote some poem, I sent it to her. She called me, and this was back in the days of like people would call and leave messages on your answering machine. And she called, and I got home and I picked up hit the answering machine. All I could hear was Banu yelling, "You did it! You wrote a new poem! You wrote a new poem!" And it was like a cracked open a door. Like, oh yeah, that was a new poem, and that what a helpful thing. Like someone can tell you you've been writing the same thing all the time, which was all right, but it'd be nice to change a little bit.
That's fine. It took me ages to realize I was writing like the same three thematic things in so much of my work, in vastly different forms. But then, yeah, I hit that point and I stopped and looked at it and I was like, there's a lot of like the same thing here. Um,
Which is not, I don't think it's bad necessarily, but
right.
it's nice to know whether you're doing it. And if you want to change, then, you know,
Yeah, and there's definitely
I,
something to be said for
I was
those
just,
moments. Sorry.
go ahead.
Um,
I was just,
those moments where you're pushed out of that comfort box and like have to try something new, and it can so often open those doors.
yeah, yeah. I was just appreciating our tea mugs. I can't quite
Oh,
read what yours is. Mine is. I want to ask you about your play. Um, that's actually something that I was thinking like at some point in this conversation I wanted to ask you about people who are watching or listening maybe not don't know that Josh is a playwright as well as a fiction writer, and you had a play at Footlights Theater, right? I think
I
last year.
did. Yeah. Was it? Yeah, it was a year in October, so just past a year now, pre-pandemic. But yeah, so I had done short theater for quite a while with the Crowbait Club in Portland, which is um, it's not quite improv, but it's a short play with improv elements theater club that I've been going to, and they've produced a couple of my plays in their annual festival. But then, yeah, for anyone who doesn't know, Of Murder and Madness was my first full length, and that got picked up at Footlights Theater for their October run in 2018. Math, yes, that sounds right.
Mhm.
No, 2019. Um, yes, sorry. Yeah, so 2019, they did the first full length performance of that, which is a vastly different experience than writing prose and getting it published, because like, I mean, as you know, you take these words, you hand them to a director and to actors for these characters you've created, and then watch them come to life on the stage with somebody else's vision in addition to your own.
Mm.
Which, I mean, the cast that I had for that and the director there were all just gave so much to it. And so it was really fun to hand it off to them and see everything that they did with it.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, but I mean, that is a good segue because I wanted to ask that. I know you've done some theater as well, and It's something that hasn't come up as much in like our past conversations, so I'm kind of
Hmm.
curious about your experience with it.
Yeah, sure. Um, well, uh, I mean, I never really wrote any plays until maybe 10 years ago or so. Uh, and I went to plays, but I never acted in them. I never was involved in any way. But I was working on a project that was called The Anesthesiologist. It was a kind of a hybrid prose piece novel kind of thing. That was what I was trying to get to. And as I was writing it, I could see it on stage. It was like happening on stage. So I thought, what if I try to make this into a play, which I had never done. And I made it into a play, and I sent it to the Maine Playwrights Festival many years ago. It didn't get in, but they did a reading of it, and that was just, it kind of unlocked some things. I was just like, wow, this is a fun thing to try. And I also, boy, what it did realize that this thing that I had thought in my head would work as a play did not work very well on the stage. Like it was interesting on the page, but once it got up on the stage and it was just one guy talking, it's like, oh, I really need to work on the drama, And once I actually got hooked up with Michael Tour. I was in a playwriting group with him for quite a few years, really good playwriting group. And that kind of got me going. Like once, as you're talking about, you give words to actors and see them run with it. It's very inspiring. Like I want to give them better words and like have it be more fun and more awkward or whatever that you can see happening. Yeah.
Do you find that the sorts of things that you write are different when you're doing plays, or is it still similar in line to your prose writing?
I think that it started off being more similar to my prose writing, but as I wrote more plays, it became quite different from my prose writing. I mean, I think I was started to be more attuned to like what makes drama, and like I like shortened everything, like no more monologues, no more like everybody's like speaks one line at a time, and tried to like get the tension really going, like
Hmm.
people kind of going at each other was a lot more interesting to watch than someone just talking in uh, um, ornate language that someone would say, "Oh, that's like Shakespeare," and then I would kind of cringe because it's like that wasn't very interesting. Um, but I mean, I think that in thinking about plays, like I think I've learned the most about plot and like how to work a plot from playwriting because it's like so streamlined and it's almost like you're moving pieces, like you're moving characters. They have to do this and this and this, and you can kind of see it all in front of you.
Hmm. Yeah, it taught me a lot about dialogue because, like, I never really struggled with dialogue when I was writing stories, but it was never quite like my main focus either. And then sitting down to tell a story essentially with only dialogue, I was
Mhm.
having these moments. I was like, what do people talk about? Like, how,
Yeah.
like, how do you carry a story through sometimes very average conversations, but like you said, like that dramatic tension,
Yeah.
in this back and
How,
forth. Like, how do you?
how did you work on like creating dialogue? Like, did you listen to people, or did you like kind of listen to it in your head, or like how did that
Yeah, I
happen?
mean, some of it was reading plays and even like watching movies and good television and
Yeah.
stuff like that. And sometimes like really quiet storytelling. Like one that always kind of comes to mind. Are you familiar with the movie The Drop? Um,
No, I'm not.
okay, so it's based on a book by an author whose name is slipping my mind because, of course, I'm on the spot and trying to think of it.
Mhm.
But it's kind of a crime thriller. Tom Hardy is the lead in the movie adaptation. But it's interesting because it's a fairly quiet movie for the most part. Like for a crime thriller, it's not like gunfights and chase scenes and stuff like that. There's this very kind of like quiet tension running through it, and a lot of that kind of
Mhm.
unfolding as the story goes on.
Mhm.
And it's super tense and brilliantly acted. And so movies like that, I stop and think about like how you get it pieces by piece.
Yeah.
Oh, and Claire in the comments, Lehane, Dennis Lehane, is the author.
Yes. Yeah. 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 Right. I
Yeah.
know.
And so yeah, that unfolding and making it work so well with kind of everyday stuff, and then carrying that back over into. I remember one of the things that really got me was the idea of like having to know what someone wants of for every moment of every scene, and for those wants to pretty much always
Yeah,
be in conflict,
right.
because otherwise people are just talking.
Right, and in some ways, I think there's like you think that a positive part of writing plays is something being natural or speaking like they would in real life or having it seem like real life, but it's not. That doesn't make it very interesting. Like they do have to be in conflict and they do have to like want things all the time. And when it looks like real life, it's kind of like it's engineered to look at like that, but it's not really.
Exactly. Yeah, it's the appearance of reality, but without all the empty space.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. You know, and I was thinking of um, um, The Wire was one that really kind of got. I'm sure lots of people love The Wire in that way, and but that was something that the way that they would so many characters would say something that I didn't understand what it was, and that but they wouldn't really stop, and they would keep going, and at some point you would kind of figure out what they were talking about. Um, yeah.
So Claire is asking, are you still doing playwriting?
Not very much recently. I don't exactly know why I stopped writing plays, but I kind of did. I mean, I think I don't really like kind of write very much like in multiple genres at one time. I kind of will write in one thing and take a little break and then do the next thing and next thing. And I just kind of got out of practice from practice. I don't know. It was just wasn't like I couldn't keep it going. I mean, I'm not really like a play person like drama, and I don't really go to so many theater things. I'm way more buy lots of books and read, kind of a book person. So I loved playing in playwriting, and it's really fun, and it's something that I would like to go back to, but not at the moment.
Well, kind of going off of
How
that.
about do you, Josh? Are you still writing?
Sorry, sorry.
Are you still writing plays?
It's been sort of on hiatus. I've got a couple. The novella I'm working on and the novel I'm revising have kind of been my focus lately. So I am still involved in Crowbait Club when I can make my schedule work. It's been spotty this past year. But that's been the majority of my theater stuff lately. Even just going to attend and listen to other people's work has been a lot of fun. So I'm hoping to be
Yeah.
able to keep doing that, and then hopefully I can carve out a little bit more time to really get back into it. Um, and because I have ideas for another full length or two, I just need to sit down and work on them at some point.
Yeah. Yeah.
But speaking of, like you were saying, moving between genres, because I know you work in like poetry and prose and essay. What is it like moving between those forms? And like, does your process change as you do that?
Uh, yeah, that's a good question. I was trying to think about that, and it's sort of a thing that I don't think too consciously about. Like I really like uh, different genres, and I kind of just dive into them. But I mean, I think the process definitely does change depending on like the genre or the form. And I'm thinking about, and sometimes I think that I write things that, even though I think they're should be in one form, end up being better in another form. Like there was a short story that I wrote. It was called "The Boom and Birds." It was about this couple who it was kind of like climate cli-fi story where this couple would climb up. They went and lived on this platform above the world and trapped birds to live. And I thought it was an interesting story idea, and I wrote it all as a story, but it just didn't work as I was like too slow. And there was this call for an anthology. What's it called? A Dangerous New World, literal books, and it was for environmental climate crisis writing. And my wife Sarah said, "Why don't you take that story and make it into a poem?" And as soon as she said that, I was like, "Oh, that's what it should be. It should be a poem. And as soon I just kind of, you strip it to what it needs to be. I just kind of put it into a ribbon on the page, and it just kind of jumped, and it was so much easier to be on the page. So, I mean, sometimes it feels like it's just you got to find the right form for something, which is difficult to do.
Yeah, no, I'm sure. It's interesting too, thinking about like you're talking about making something smaller and kind of pulling out the center of it. And I know
Yeah.
I've talked to other people who have taken poems and then realized that they actually wanted to be short stories
Wow.
and let them expand the opposite direction.
That seems gutsier to me and harder to do. Like there was a way that I had all this stuff and all I had to do was, I could really narrow it, and to expand and keep writing more and more and more seems challenging to me.
Yeah,
You know what?
no, it's funny how we're drawn sometimes either toward brevity or longer works. Because to my mind, expanding something seems easier, but I also like if I write a story under 2,000 words, like this is a major accomplishment. Um, because my stuff is like 5, 10, 15, all the way up to like novel length ideas. And like that's how my brain thinks in terms of story usually. And
Yeah,
so the idea of trying
yeah,
to strip a story down to one poem, to me feels like more of a challenge.
right. Well, I mean, I think that's a very good point because my brain is definitely on the brevity side. Like I mainly function as a poet, and anything else that any genres that I go into are as a poet, and sometimes I feel like I'm always a little bit out of my element in other areas, and even sometimes in poetry I feel that way. But it's like everything is kind of coming I down all.
Yeah, but I have to say it does shine through, I think, in your work so much that that poetic language, even in things that aren't technically poems, but the precision and the imagery and stuff that comes through. Can you talk a little bit
Hmm,
about like
thanks.
what is that process like for the writing and then the revision, as far as the language is concerned?
Yeah, I mean, as far as revision goes, I mean, I really try to on a first take. I really try to get like a some kind of truth to the piece. Like I try to have something that I can feel inside, like I want to get down, and I try to get it down. And then revision is usually for me is like as a kind of almost like line line item revisions. Like I really like to work the wording and changing, as you would like a poem. You're really changing on a word level, and I don't always revise very much. Like when I hear people and like they'll revise a whole scene, and will take somebody out and move someone in, and like that stuff is just beyond my idea of revision. Like I would much rather like narrow in to a few words and try to make something really kind of jump off the page, and rather than like working on a plot revisions. Like, and I think when I write fiction, I think that I just noticed that those are where my tendencies lie. And um, if I could if I could write like I mean, I think it's kind of interesting because you're talking about how when you write a story, it's like novella length without even really working on it. And sometimes I'm like, man, I would love to do that. I would like to sit down and just write the story, and it would be, before I know it, it's like a novel, and then I have to work from there. But that's just not how my brain works.
Yeah, no, I totally understand that. The novel I'm revising right now, actually, so revision's normally supposed to tighten things up, and it keeps getting longer the more I revise it, and it's beyond like what its word count is even supposed to be. I'm like,
Mm,
this is not what it's supposed to be doing.
right.
Um, but like you say, it has a lot to do with like getting character and plot onto the page, and that's why it's growing. And one of the things I struggle with sometimes is that voice and that language, where I'll get caught up in the story and kind of lose sight of the sentences,
Yeah.
um,
Mm.
which is a very important piece to make work.
when you're saying that, that reminds me of a friend used to tell me an anecdote that she heard Michael Ondaatje tell on stage when he was reading from the English Patient, and I think they asked him about why it ended where it did, and he said that he had written actually like 10,000 words past the ending, and then at some point he was realizing that everybody was falling asleep, like all the characters were falling asleep, and he realized that actually it was done. Like he had to go back to the spot where it really ended and wake everybody up and find the real ending.
Huh. Yeah, no, I can definitely see that happening. And I've heard similar things for beginnings as well, where sometimes you have to like write your way into the story, but then you realize that the first five scenes or whatever that were there were really just finding where that story actually began.
Right. Yeah. Because it means it's exciting to be dropped into something and it's already that the world has been formed rather than you watching it be formed and all of a sudden you're just in it and it's
Mhm.
there.
Yeah, and I don't know what it's like for you, but I know writing sometimes it's that discovery process where like we have an idea of where it's going, but then you sit down at the page and find so much, even like just for ourselves, that kind of changes what the story is going to be, whether it's like the characters making decisions or just connecting dots during the process.
Oh yeah, there's nothing better than surprising yourself, I think, on something. And sometimes I'll have an idea that I could include in the piece, and then I'll be like, no, I don't think that'll fit, or that's too ridiculous, or I don't know what any other kind of thing. But then once I have that thought, often I'd be like, no, wait a minute, I got to get this in here. I got to figure out some way that I can get this thing in.
Yeah, I still remember one of my novels in progress that's shelved right now. I was halfway to three-quarters of the way through it, and we're talking like epic fantasy, so this was a lot of words.
Hmm.
But and then that was the moment where I actually realized what the book was about,
Oh wow.
like halfway into it, because like I had the plot, but like that through line of like what what story is this actually telling, like about the characters,
Mhm.
didn't click until that far into it, and I was like, oh, like that makes sense, but now it needs to actually like be there intentionally.
Yeah. So then what do you do at that point then?
Well, that book had a couple other issues. So it's kind of stewing for the moment. But now
Mhm.
that I know kind of what it's about, I can go back and look at some of the it's a lot of interwoven story threads as well. So I can look at each of those kind of different pieces and really make each of them work on their own, but also kind of tie them all together into this idea. It has a lot to do with like self-actualization and defining your own path
Hmm.
as opposed to being told by other people what you are.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah.
Which is never explicitly stated, but like all of the character journeys have to do with that. So it's kind of being aware of that. I think their stories are going to be very different when I get back to this one.
Well, that makes me think, and this is not to any way say that this is what you should do with that novel you're talking about, but there were a couple. I tried a couple drafts of whole novels, hundreds of pages, and at some point there's like just nothing more of a relief than to be like that's bad, it's done. I am not gonna work anymore with that one. Like that's in the drawer, like that piece that I was the anesthesiologist that kind of got me into playwriting, like it was just there were some interesting things in there, but it was just not overall a piece that was ready for the world, so it was a relief to let go of.
Yeah, no, so the first novel I ever wrote, it's the piece that got me into grad school, and it's the thing I worked on through grad school, including my creative thesis.
Well.
And that was the process I had with that one, where I still love the characters and the plot of it, but the manuscript as it exists currently, I I could keep fighting with it for the next 15 years and maybe get it to work. Or eventually, what I want to do is just set it aside and write that same book, but from the ground up.
Oh, that's a great idea. Yeah,
It,
that's a lot of work, but that's a great idea.
yeah, because like the pieces of it are, am still committed to, but the manuscript, like with that first play that you've been talking about, like
Mhm.
is not something that can work. Like there, it's too fatally flawed, kind of in some very core places because it was that learning experience. Like it was great and I don't regret working on it, but in order to tell that story now, it needs to look different than it is.
Well, that reminds me of when I was in college, and I think I was a senior in college, and I had to turn in like a final writing portfolio of stories, and I had written a new story. It was like the final 2 weeks of class, and I written a new story that I was going to put into the portfolio, and I've been writing on it forever. And I had just gotten this new laptop. Like laptops were new, I think, at that point. And I had been writing on the laptop, and then I hit. It was one of those moments where I hit the button and the whole thing disappeared, and then I hit the wrong button to save it, and the whole thing was gone. And it
Oh
was
no.
like 2 weeks of work that was going to be the final story. It was totally gone, and I couldn't get it. And then I thought, well, maybe I should just write it again. I could recreate it from what I had in my memory. And then I realized that that wouldn't work either. And what I had to do was write a new story, like come up with something else in this final few days and just do it. And there's always a little bit of freedom. Like once you kind of decide that you're going to do the thing that is kind of ridiculous to do, you're going to do.
Yeah, I can't remember who it was, but one of the most wild novel writing processes I've ever heard about, and this was a fairly well accomplished author. They I remember hearing them talking about they would write the entire first draft of their book out, and then stick it in a drawer and not look at it again. And they would go and they would write that book again from memory.
Wow.
And they said that whatever pieces made it from the first draft to the second draft belonged there, and anything else that they didn't remember, like, was the dross that they wanted to get rid of.
That's great.
And every book, that was their process. And I'm like, on the one hand, it sounds like it could lead to some great work. On the other hand, that's a lot of effort to put in to just get to like your first functioning draft.
Yes, yeah, and also like totally, like when I think about my memory doesn't quite work that way. Like I might just forget really good things and then you've forgotten them.
Right. Yeah, and
Yeah,
I think that
that's
I think that speaks so much to the importance of like finding the process that works for you. And for each person as a writer, like taking those risks and like stepping outside that box, but also being able to say like I tried this thing and it was the worst writing practice I've ever done, versus like stepping out in a new way and discovering this like really works for me. And that's going to look
yeah,
different for every person.
yeah, yep.
And so for you, I know you said that you write pretty much every day. Is that what you found tends to be the best?
That seems to be the best thing. Yeah, I used to have a little bit more time to write at different times of the day or things, but I kind of write and try to write in the morning for an hour or two or whatever I can kind of squeeze in. Like that's seems the best way to do it. And like if I can something good can come in that time, then that's good. If sometimes I'm just like staring at the birds in the bird feeder and waiting to see if go take my dog for a walk. But at least I'm sitting there and maybe something will happen.
Yeah. And so a slightly shift of topics, but I know we've talked a little bit before about your work as an archivist.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and so can you talk a little bit about how that, and also just like what other kind of non-writing influences in your life kind of find their way into your writing, either directly or indirectly?
Well, yeah. So at the Maine Women Writers Collection, that is, I mean, it's just a beautiful place to be. And like when I working on Elizabeth Coatsworth, who is a writer who died in the 80s, and she lived in Overborough. Was married to Henry Beston, who's kind of a famous naturalist. She wrote all kinds of things, poetry, children's books, novels, lots of very prolific, and also just kept everything in her life. This kind of sometimes it seems like a problem when people keep everything in their life, but it was not for her, at least not for my end of it. I didn't have to deal with it all, but there are bins of photographs and in some cases like of her house in Chimney Farm where she lived in Overborough. There was just probably, I mean, without too much exaggeration, hundreds and hundreds of photos of the house from various angles. And there's a way that that kind of like seeps into my consciousness. I mean, it's not exactly that I would ever write a piece about that house, but maybe I will. I mean, it's just something that I feel very happy to be looking through another photograph of it, another photograph, and another photograph. And sometimes I'll put them on our Instagram account. And Gary Lawless and Beth Leonard, who own Gulf of Maine Books in Brunswick, this past week, Gary sent me a little note that said, we're remodeling our house, which is to mean our farm where they live, and we don't know what it looks like. Can you send me a copy of that photo that you put up on Instagram, because that's exactly what we want to recreate. And it was the house from like 1935. So I can look it up, send it to them, and they're like doing work on their house right now. And I mean, that's not exactly like would make it into my writing, but it's incredibly inspiring to be a part of like the kind of literary fabric of Maine and being connected to other writers. And it's that part is very inspiring to me.
Yeah, and I feel like there's so much that even if it doesn't make it onto the page, like it's all formative,
Yeah, yeah,
in some way or another. I feel like.
yes. Oh, I
Um,
forgot I didn't answer your other part of your question was the other forms of inspiration, like not writing things, right?
yeah.
Like that's a good question. Well, certainly, I mean, I definitely watch Netflix and other movies. Uh, the Queen's Gambit we watched, which was really good. Oh, Borgen. I don't know if there's this it's kind of like The West Wing, but set in Sweden, political drama. That was really good. Um, what other, The Woods, walking, I mean, maybe you can see the woods a little bit outside the window, like walking many times a day with my dog out in the woods. And I was just looking out here from my seat into the just the edge of the woods, and Sarah had spotted an owl that is just like sitting right there, and spent like a half hour just peering across the field waiting for a vole. So I mean, that's again, I'm not going to maybe you write poems about that, but that seems very inspiring to me.
Yeah, no, I love the imagery. So Neil Gaiman has described like working on your writing. He used the imagery of like a compost heap, and
Yeah.
so yeah, putting all this stuff on and letting it just kind of sit and like decay and mix together there, and then you can take that and grow things out of it.
Hmm. Yeah,
And
yeah,
it's such a good picture, I think, of how we kind of collect little things from all over.
yes, yeah.
Because I know I've had like music videos that I saw on television, and then like one line from a movie, and then a random thought. I think I got a character's name from a street sign one time.
Right.
Like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, because there's magic in that, right? Because
yeah,
even if people don't know that street sign that you've made that named the character, you know it, and that like that's a little stem of magic, and people can feel the magic even if they don't know what's connected to it.
yeah. And so often I know we hit those writing things, especially like on a story that maybe we're kind of stuck on, or like, and you're sitting with it, and then all of a sudden, like enough pieces come together and it
Hmm.
clicks, and like this something is born in that moment,
Yeah,
from all these
yeah,
different pieces.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's a fun. I mean, that's fun question to think about, like the ways that you are unexpectedly inspired.
And it's funny too, because like that common question that people get asked as writers is like, where do your ideas come from? And
Right.
I know, like we can give answers, but so often it's like the ether, like they exist, and then we discover them by accident somehow.
Yes, right. We stumble into them. You know, we look up and that's the street sign and that's the person's name. So yeah.
So I've been behind on the comments a little bit. Danielle and Juliet say hi to you.
Oh yes, my niece and nephew. That's fun. Hello, Daniel and Juliet.
And Claire was just chiming in a little bit. That speaking of finding the process, it's also important to find a process that's fun. Because
Mm.
if we're going to be spending so much time doing this, why not enjoy it as well?
So true. So true. Yeah. Well, so much of it is not enjoyable, but with the stuff that you can do, make it fun, then yes, it's really important.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a very good point, actually. And I think sometimes that gets lost.
Yeah, and it's funny. I hear writers talk sometimes about enjoying having written, but they don't enjoy writing. And like I can totally get how that could be somebody's perspective, but it feels strange to me to think about it like that. Because I have a very hard time with revision usually. Like I don't enjoy that nearly as much. But sitting
Hmm.
down and creating something like brand new and like bringing characters and ideas to life, like when it works, it's just this indescribable feeling, and it's so
Yeah.
delightful.
Yes, yes, I totally agree. I mean, also there, I think there's a lot to appreciate in about writing, and I just hearing when you mentioned hello from my niece and nephew, and I that made something I just flashed back to when Scott, who's my brother, and I lived in New York City, and we were just we lived together for maybe 2 years or so, and we went to so many readings of different fiction and poetry all around New York, and it was just a really fun time, and it was a very inspiring time. And there's a connection to, like, if you find a way to that world to be fun, even if you're just watching it from the outside, like there's a lot to be said for that.
Yeah. Okay, so we're coming up on 4 o'clock. Um,
Great. Joe,
I
I just wanted to say last thing that, I mean, having conversations with you and talking about writing is a very, that's an inspiring thing to me. Like it's a pretty rare opportunity as a writer to get to talk about things that matter, and I really appreciate it that you asked me that.
Thank you. Yeah, no, this has been so much fun. So Deborah, who is another writer for those who are tuning
Yeah.
in, another writer in Maine, is saying that she doesn't remember who describes it this way, but it's like when you unhook the daily practical doing things brain, then you can sit by the river of words and images and scoop them up.
Well, that's said very well. Yeah, right.
Yes.
Hopefully, I mean, that's the hope.
That is fantastic imagery. But yes,
Yeah.
no, thank you. It's so much fun to be able to sit and talk about writing. I have one more question to wrap us up here, which is it's the question that we always kind of end these live streams with. So what is something, book, movie, play, song, any form of storytelling, just that you've been enjoying recently?
Oh yeah, good. Well, that was I was before we started a stream. I was running around and getting books, and I can kind of just quickly show them the books that I most have been loving recently. Um, Museum of Small Bones by Miho Nanaka. Poems from Ashland Poetry Press. Really, really good. I've been loving that. Um, Megan Grumbling, Persephone in Elite Anthropocene, just came out from Acre Books. I also really love that one. Each Day is Like an Anchor, Sama Abdul Rakib, chapbook from Clearing. I've been loving that. And I just finished um, The Lying Life of Adults. Elena Ferrante. It kind of takes my head off when I read. The Neapolitan novels is like the best thing that I've read in the past decade, and I thought that this one wasn't going to be as good, because how could it be as good? And it really was. Like, I got to the end, and I would be sitting and talking to people, and I would think, oh yeah, I have to go and see what's going on with those characters, because I think that everything is going to fall apart. But it didn't. It was very surprising to me. um, but
I love.
Oh, those aren't. There are all kinds of other things that are
Yeah.
inspiring to me, but it feels like it's always important, especially at this time, like books and buying books and supporting bookstores. It seems important to emphasize that.
Yes, yeah, no, definitely support your indie bookstores because they need it, especially right now. And they're doing such fantastic work for books and for the arts.
Amen to that.
Yeah. So the book I'm kind of pitching to everybody right now. So I'm currently reading. Oh my, it's the weekend, and I spaced and everything I want to say. Okay. So These Violent Delights by Chloe Gong. is a young adult fantasy, but it's Romeo and Juliet in the 1920s in Shanghai gangster setting. And so they're the leader, the heirs of two rival gangs in like or early 20s China right after the war, plus monsters. And so there's like Shakespearean sonnets woven into it, and just this gorgeous, lush, descriptive language that she uses all throughout. It's one of those books that like you pick up and just on the first page, the language is just like right there, and just makes you like stop and admire it.
But what a, I mean, that what an engaging combination of language and world creating, and like, yeah, you pitched that one well to me.
Yeah, well, it was fun because this is one of those ones like I heard a lot about it in the lead up, and then got my hands on a copy when it came out. And it's one of those ones, and I'm still working on it, but like where the reputation pays off once you actually get to dive into it. And my last thing, and then I will wrap us up. Stepping outside of books. So I'm not sure who follows Taylor Swift, but she took the pandemic and wrote two albums because she is more creative than I am in the midst of all this time. But Folklore and Evermore, they actually go together. And speaking of storytelling, each song is basically like a mini story told in like 3 to 4 minutes. And so for those who know her as like a pop artist, these albums she paired with like the National and Bon Iver and a bunch of like really well-known classic songwriters, and it's unlike anything else I'd come across before. They're like slow and melancholic and beautiful.
I love Taylor Swift. I don't know her all that well, but is there a song about her in the Great Gatsby house that I would have heard that on the radio?
um it's possible. It wasn't the Gatsby house. There's one about her buying a manor. Maybe I forget
That's
which house it was.
that's it.
Uh,
Yeah.
okay, yeah, that was on the Folklore album.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, it's a lot of yeah, it's history and yeah, different characters, real and imagined, like living lives and love and heartbreak, and just it's just speaking of like the brevity of storytelling.
Hmm. Yeah.
That's definitely something I've been enjoying as well. Just the poetry of song.
Yeah. That's fun.
Um, but okay, so that brings us to time. I could just keep doing this, but we will
It
wrap it
was
up for today.
a fast hour.
So Jefferson, thank you for joining and for all this conversation. And thank you also to everyone who tuned in, who asked questions and comments. Thanks for hanging out with us. It's been a lot of fun, and tune back next month, date to be determined. But if all goes according to plan, Diane Sanchez will be back co-hosting with me, and we'll continue bringing exciting new writers in for these conversations. So everyone enjoy your weekend and your holiday season, and stay warm, stay safe. We'll see you next time.